Hi all. So today we're going to talk about nervous system, nervous tissue, and get into the physiology behind how nervous tissue operates. So one of the main functions of the nervous system is that it is able to pull sensory information from various aspects of the body, not just sensory information that you're consciously aware of, but also sensory information that's working on the autonomic side, which is all subconscious. For example, like what is your blood glucose levels or what is your blood calcium levels? These are things that you're not consciously aware of, but are constantly being monitored by the nervous system. The sensory input is going to be the activation of some type of receptor that will be connected to a nerve ending that will then send action potentials or nerve impulses to the central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. Once you get to the sensory input is sent to the central nervous system, the next step is integration. And what integration is taking all that sensory information and actually integrating it. What does it mean? Is there some type of response that needs to occur? And what happens there is that you will then sometimes get a motor output. The motor output could either be a conscious movement or control, but it could also be a subconscious or autonomic response. And most likely a motor output is going to involve an effector organ, and your primary effector organs are your muscles, all three types, and glands. So you want to take a drink of water. The sensory input is where is the glass of water, where am I in relationship to the glass of water? What muscles are currently contracted? Are they in a contracted state? Do I need to move certain muscles? So all that sensory information is being sent to the central nervous system, which will integrate it and then send out some signals for a motor output. And when we look at the divisions of the nervous system, we break it down to two main divisions. The central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. This is your primary integration and command center. And then you have the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is going to be the periphery. This will include all of your paired spinal and cranial nerves, and their main job is to carry messages to and from the central nervous system. Looking at the peripheral nervous system, we have two functional divisions. One is a sensory division. This is what we also refer to as the afferent or AFF division. And you're going to have somatic afferent fibers and visceral afferent fibers. This is a division of the nervous system that is sending sensory information to the central nervous system. The somatic side is going to be conveying impulses from skin, skeletal muscles, and joints. These particular areas of your body are things that you are consciously aware of and sensations that you are consciously aware of. The visceral afferent fibers, these will convey impulses from your visceral organs, and you may not necessarily be aware of this. This might actually be subconsciously. The motor or efferent division, this will transmit impulses from the central nervous system to the effector organs, and we refer to this as the efferent division, or EFF. You'll also see these terms used when we get to the cardiovascular system. Blood vessels that feed into a capillary are referred to as afferent. They're feeding into or going towards. Efferent vessels are ones that are coming away from. We can even take the motor division and break that up into two divisions, and those two divisions would be the somatic or voluntary nervous system. The somatic division of the motor division is going to be conscious control of all of your skeletal muscles, meaning you are consciously in control of when and how you move these muscles. The autonomic or involuntary nervous system, this is where you have your visceral motor nerve fibers. This will regulate smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And there are two subdivisions to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division is going to primarily be your fight or flight mechanism. This is usually activated in times of stress. Parasympathetic division usually conserves energy, and it promotes housekeeping functions during times of rest or times of not stress. Looking at the histology of the nervous system, there are two principal cell types. You have neurons. These are excitable cells that will transmit electrical signals. And then you have what we call glial cells or neural glial cells. These are what we refer to as supporting cells. Because your neurons are amitotic and they cannot undergo cell division or mitosis anymore, your neurons are with you for life. So if you live to the age of 100, your neurons will be 100 years old. And the job of these glial cells is to help maintain those cells and to keep them so that they can live to 100 years old. And there are many different types of supporting cells. We'll look at a few in a few minutes. The first type is the astrocytes. These are the most abundant. They're versatile, and they are highly branched. They cling to neurons, synaptic endings, and capillaries, and they help to support and brace the neurons. Astrocytes will also help to determine capillary permeability, guide the migration of young neurons, and control the chemical environments, such as neurotransmitter release, that the neurons are exposed to. They will also participate in information processing located within the brain. Microglial cells, these are small ovoid cells with thorny processes. They will migrate toward injured neurons, and they will phagocytize microorganisms and neuronal debris. Epidermal cells, these range in shape from squamous to columnar. They may be ciliated. These types of cells will actually line the central cavities of the brain and spinal column, and they will separate the central nervous system interstitial fluid from cerebral spinal fluid. These epidermal cells contribute to something that we call the blood-brain barrier, which is something we'll get into in the next few chapters. And here you can see these epidermal cells, how they're all these are tight junctions between these cells, and they are really preventing what can or cannot pass through. Oligodendrites, these are branch cells. The processes of these branch cells will wrap central nervous system fibers, forming a myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is an insulated portion of the axon of the neuron. And the insulated portions, actually, you do not have action potentials that travel down the insulated portions. And what we'll see when we talk about the physiology of this is that typically nerve transmission, or the action potential traveling down an axon of a neuron, is by something called saltatory conduction, where it sort of jumps from segment to segment. And believe it or not, that's a lot faster than if you were to depolarize the entire length of the neuron. Satellite and Schwann cells. Schwann cells will surround the peripheral nerve fibers and form myelin sheaths as well. This is vital to regeneration of damaged peripheral nerve fibers. So sometimes if you do damage a nerve fiber and it's sort of in the periphery, it can sometimes repair itself, okay? And here is, in blue here, this is what we mean by that myelin sheath. And you can see that there are exposed regions of yellow here. These exposed regions are going to be the parts that will actually get the action potential will travel down. So instead of the action potential traveling down the entire neuron, what will happen is it will actually jump from here to here to here to here to here to here. And that, again, that's a process called saltatory conduction. We'll see that in a little bit, but it's a much, much faster mechanism. Looking at the neurons or nerve cells, some special characteristics of these cells: they are very long-lived, upwards of 100 years or more. They are amitotic with a few exceptions. They have a very high metabolic rate, which depends on the continuous supply of oxygen and glucose. And some functions of their plasma membrane, or something that we saw with the skeletal muscle membrane, is that it allows for functioning in electrical signaling and cell-to-cell interactions during development. The cell body of the neuron, this is the biosynthetic center. It is has a spherical nucleus with a nucleolus. It has a very well-developed Golgi apparatus. This is primarily because the cell body is going to end up producing neurotransmitters, which need to be packaged and then sent down the axon to the axonal terminals, where they will then be released into, say, a synaptic cleft, where, as we saw with skeletal muscles, the acetylcholine neurotransmitter got released through those vesicles, which were formed by the Golgi. They were very important in the signaling of the skeletal muscle. This is a typical structure of a neuron, and here you can see the cell body, the extensive Golgi here, the axon is here. These little Receptive regions here are called dendrites. They are meant to pick up neurotransmitter and initiate action potential. You typically only have one axon, which will transmit the action potential down to the axonal terminals. And this is what we saw connected to the skeletal muscle in that case where they were releasing the neurotransmitter and you got the signal across to the muscle. So your two primary processes are dendrites and axons. The bundles of the processes are called tracts in the central nervous system, but they're called nerves in the peripheral nervous system. They're the same thing, it's just depending on the location, they're called different things. Your dendrites, these are short, tapering, and diffusely branched. This is your receptive or input region of the neuron, and they will convey electrical impulses or signals towards the cell body. The axon, typically you have one axon per cell, arising from the axon hillock. They're very long. They're what we refer to as nerve fibers and occasional branches. You may see occasional branches too. At the end of the axon, you'll have numerous terminal branches and knob-like axonal terminals. This is where you'll get the secretory region of the neuron, and you have the release of neurotransmitters to excite or inhibit other cells. Functions, you have conducting region of a neuron. This will generate and transmit nerve impulses, action potentials away from the cell body. And molecules or organelles are moved along the axons by motor molecules in two directions. Anterograde is towards the axonal terminals. Sometimes you need to move down mitochondria, membrane components, enzymes. Retrograde is movement towards the cell body, and this is where you want organelles that need to be degraded by the lysosomes. Signal molecules, viruses, toxins, all would be moved towards the cell body. We had talked about this myelin sheath. This is a segmented protein lipoid sheath that is around long or large diameter axons. And the main function of the myelin sheath is to protect and electrically insulate the axon, as well as increase the speed of nerve impulse transmission. The Schwann cells, these are part of those glial cells that are responsible for wrapping many times around the axon, forming the myelin sheath. And essentially this ends up being concentric layers of Schwann cell membrane. The nodes of Ranvier, these are the exposed sites between the myelin sheath. And this is where you will actually end up seeing the saltatory conduction and the action potential occurring. So here you can see Schwann cells wrapping around the axon, and that leads to sort of an insulated region of that part of the axon. The most common type of axon is going to be that, the most common type of neuron is going to be that of multipolar, which means it has many dendrites in a single axon. But we also do have bipolar and unipolar neurons. They're much more sparse throughout the body, and we'll talk about them when we get to the specific regions that we typically see them. For example, bipolar neurons are typically seen in the rods and cones of the eye, the retina of the eye. But it's not something that you see pretty spread out throughout the body. We classify neurons based on three types. We have sensory neurons. These are ones that are transmitting impulses from the sensory receptors to the central nervous system. And then we have motor or efferent neurons. These are carrying impulses from the central nervous system to the effector structures. We also have what we refer to as interneurons. This is communication within the central nervous system. So this would be a neuron going from one part of the brain, say the left hemisphere, to the right hemisphere. Or say a part of the brain like the occipital lobe down to the medulla. So this is communication within the central nervous system entirely. The function of neurons is that they are very, the neurons are very excitable or irritable. They respond to adequate stimulus by generating an action potential or nerve impulses. And the impulse is always the same regardless of the stimulus. This is with action potentials, there is no strong or weak action potential. There is just a single action potential. Okay, So now we're actually getting into how the physiology of the nerve and neuron functions, getting into action potentials and things like that. So we're going to see some of the stuff that we lightly touched on with the skeletal muscle system. Okay, but I'm actually going to end this as part one. Part two, we'll get into the physiology. All right, so I'll see you guys in a little bit.